Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Rebellious Wellness Lifestyle. Today, I have a doctor that I'm super excited to talk to because he is a modern, ancient doctor wisdom kind of guy, right? He's combining the ancient practice of Oriental medicine with the science of modern medicine, working around it, above it, beyond it to get people well. Dr. Crawford, thanks for being with us. May I call you
Hi, thank
Brehan?
Yeah, please, first name. So when I entered the field, the first professional degree that the schools gave you was a master's degree. And we have doctorates available now, but I haven't taken the time to go back and
Oh, okay.
actually finish one. It's a 4-year master's degree. In some states, they confer you the title of physician or doctor anyway, but not the one I'm in.
Okay.
First name is fine. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Before we started the recording, we were trying to decide what direction we wanted to go in. And first of all, I would like the listeners to know a little bit about you because I don't have a bio in front of me and I'm not good at reading the bios. They're so boring. So tell
Yeah.
us how you came to this practice.
Originally, my very first exposure to Chinese medicine was when I was a teenager. I had no interest in any kind of medical field at the time. In fact, I'm not really interested in anything other than stuff teenage boys are generally into, video games and that kind of thing. But my dad got really sick. He almost died from a terrible skin disease.
Hmm.
And it's a very common story for people with any kind of obscure or chronic illness. Saw his primary care physician, was referred to a specialist in dermatology, prescribed steroids, didn't really do anything, and then started seeing alternative medicine providers of different flavors, naturopaths, chiropractors who did muscle testing, that kind of thing. And he didn't really get anywhere with any of them and was slowly going insane from what was affecting him because it was basically he was not able to sleep at all. He would
Oh,
fall
God.
asleep for about 20, 30 minutes at night, and then he would wake up covered in hives for the rest of the night.
Mm.
And during that time, he was still trying to go to work and live a productive life. A friend of his eventually said, "Hey, I want you to see this guy that I know. He's a little goofy, but maybe he can help you." And my dad's, "I'll try anything."
Mm.
So he goes, and this man was the person who eventually would, in a very long roundabout circle of events, become my mentor in my own residency. And so I actually ended up spending about 6 years under his direct supervision, learning to manage complex and chronic cases, chronic infections, oncology support, things of that nature. And my dad saw him, and Heiner is his name. And Heiner very presently said, "I think I can help you, but there's something going on in your life that's causing this to happen. And until you address that, it could always come back." And that's a thing we have to talk about. Lifestyle plays a huge role in what's causing many kinds of chronic illnesses. So my dad took his herbs. I don't remember much about that at the time, other than he said it was like putting a dish towel in his mouth 3 times a day. It was just powder. He'd mix it in water and drink it. And sure enough, he got better very quickly. Like within two
Wow.
weeks, he was sleeping again.
Mm.
And saw the guy a few more times for follow-up. Eventually stopped taking herbs after 2 months or something. And then for 10 years was totally fine. And then when I was in college, the situation came back. And my dad knew, like intuitively, he knew it
Mm.
was his work that was causing this. He was under a very high stress career. And so he took an early retirement and everything cleared up on its own. That was it.
Wow. Wow. And that lit a fire for you.
That lit a fire for me. And everybody's got a medical history. My own personal story regarding this too is that I grew up, my life was saved by antibiotics when I was 2. I had a life-threatening kidney infection, but of course that destroyed my digestive system. And so I grew up with terrible IBS. I was morbidly obese into my 20s, and multiple factors playing a role in that. Nutrition and exercise habits and social support and all of that kind of thing plays a role. But I had been a normal, healthy kid with a normal, healthy gut until the antibiotics.
Mm.
And through Chinese medicine, actually finally really fixed that situation for myself. And then now that's the focus of my professional endeavors. I have a private practice, but I co-founded a company that helps people with chronic IBS and antibiotic related side effects and things like that.
I love hearing how the pieces, the dominoes fall towards
Yeah.
somebody's moment right now in time. And you mentioned chronic disease. That was one of the things that we wanted to talk about. But first, can you tell people what really is the practice of Chinese medicine? I know that some people will equate it with acupuncture, so they may be familiar, they may have had acupuncture, but it's actually a much bigger philosophy and practice for the
Very
body than
much so.
just putting needles in pain points.
Yeah. So Chinese medicine is a whole system into and of itself. In a very broad scope, it's really not any different from Western medicine. It's looking at the interactions between a human body and its environment, whether that's the atmosphere, the food quality, the water, the microbes to which we are exposed, the people with whom we spend our time, all of those things play a role in your health and disease, genetics. And we describe those phenomenon in different ways because it is a pre-scientific medicine. And so it was developed before we had microscopes, before we had high performance liquid chromatography, before we had blood tests and all of that kind of thing. Since those technologies have been invented, Chinese medicine has, as it has always throughout history, whenever it encounters a new system of medicine, it absorbs it, modifies itself, gets rid of things that don't make sense, and then creates a new, more holistic understanding than it had before. And that's since about the 19th, that has been happening with Western medicine. So in China, the fields of Western and Eastern medicine are very strongly integrated. You'll have somebody who goes to a Western medical school, becomes an MD, and then goes into a Chinese medicine residency and then ends up practicing Chinese herbal medicine or acupuncture. You can also have the other thing happen. You go to Chinese medicine school, you can do a residency in oncology or orthopedic surgery, and then go into that specialty field for your practice. In terms of the methodologies and the interventions we have, acupuncture is the one that's known most in the West. That largely has to do with licensing and legalities. Herbal medicine in China is about 90 to 95% of Chinese medicine. So
Mm.
acupuncture is a very small piece of Chinese medicine in China. It
Really?
is, yeah. And if you look at what it's used for in China, you'll see that market forces and research data have been able to basically narrowed the field into what acupuncture treats very well. So that you'll see acupuncture wards in hospitals for neurological conditions. It'll be used for stroke recovery, for Bell's palsy, for migraine headache. And we have fantastic amounts of data, modern scientific research data to show that acupuncture is really effective for those kinds of things.
Hmm.
You'll also see it be used for musculoskeletal concerns, low back pain, neck pain, shoulder pain, injury recovery, arthritis, things of that nature are very well treated by acupuncture. It's an assistant to rehab. And so you'll see in a mature medical system like in China, you'll see somebody will go get passive therapies like acupuncture to help them recover from pain to the point that they can then engage in physical exercise, which is what keeps them out of pain and helps them to fully recover long term. In the West, because that's often the main tool that's emphasized for Chinese medicine providers, some people hang a shingle and put themselves out there as an acupuncturist that can treat any kind of thing.
Mm.
And one thing that acupuncture does do very well is it helps promote a healthy autonomic nervous system response and what's called homeostasis. Most of us are stuck in fight or flight most of the time. We live in a very high stress society. There is a real tangible stress relief benefit from acupuncture, which then confers symptomatic relief of a whole host of other things, sometimes for days or enough that people are able to actually like completely go into remission from a condition. The acupuncture didn't actually get the condition to go away. It just put them in a place where their body was able to restore itself.
Mhm.
That's not a repeatable or reliable method, so it's not something that is done most of the time in China. Also, there are many different styles of acupuncture, and what's commonly practiced in China isn't really relaxing the way that a lot of Americans would like it to be. And so in the US, you'll see a lot of acupuncturists working more like a massage therapist would. Very gentle, very, very soothing environment, gentle music playing. You might have a little water feature in the corner of the room or some crystals or something like that. And I don't want to call it placebo effect. It might be placebo effect is real. There's a real medical
Hmm.
benefit to that, but it's not just the acupuncture that's helping people in that situation.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting to know. The woman that I mentioned earlier, the doctor that I had who was a traditional Chinese medicine doc, her acupuncture hurt sometimes. And she
Uh-huh.
said, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
you're just going to have to breathe through it if you want to get
Yeah.
relief. So when you're talking about it's not like this beautiful, gentle thing, it wasn't always that for me.
If you look at the needles that were used 1,000 years ago in China, because acupuncture has been used in one form or another for about 5,000 years. If you look at the needles that go back that far, and if you look at the classical texts that describe not just how to use those needles, but also the post-treatment care that patients should undergo to prevent infection, you
Mhm.
can see that it was actually a form of minor surgery. And because the needles are very large, they're not filiform 32 gauge stainless steel. They are made often out of stone, which has been shaved to be very sharp, but it's not as tiny as what you would see in an acupuncturist's office these days. And so there would be blood more than
There
what we're
will be
used to.
blood. Okay.
And it's not necessarily comfortable. And that's not how acupuncture is practiced in China these days, but it is a little bit, it's more intense than what a lot of Americans are used to. There are plenty of American acupuncture providers. Like I practice more of a Chinese style, and with enough practice and time, you can develop the skill to make it more comfortable for the patient. It doesn't have to be incredibly painful. But if you look at the research data in China, they've tried many different methods, and you'll see that there's a certain amount of, we'll call it point stimulation, that's necessary
Mhm.
to actually get the therapeutic effect that most patients desire. Not everybody is a great candidate for that kind of treatment. Some people
Mhm.
just need a more gentle approach, and that's fine. And there are other methods as well, which is why in China you'll see a lot of people go more towards massage, acupressure, qigong,
Mhm.
which is breathing movement, that kind of thing,
Mhm. Mhm.
or herbal medicine.
Which brings us to chronic disease. I'm not sure how,
Yeah.
but I'm making the connection.
Okay.
It's my show and I can. Because I know that many listeners will either be suffering, struggling with a chronic condition and or have a friend, a sister, a mother, a father,
Mhm.
and oftentimes they've expended all of the possibilities of Western medicine's tools, right? The toolbox has been used, it's empty. Now they're saying, we're going to give you an SSRI, perhaps that will make you feel better. We're going to give you steroids because that will eliminate the itching or the pain. Tell us about, is there hope for people with chronic diseases outside of Western medicine, chronic conditions with outside of
Yes.
Western medicine?
Absolutely hope. In fact, when you give up hope, that's the same as somebody paying you to stay sick. You
Mm,
have to maintain that hope. You have to you have to ask your family, your close friends to help you keep that hope, not to continue throwing away your money trying things that don't work, but to be open to something working if even if nothing that you've tried previously has. Yeah, giving up hope, I think, is one of the pitfalls that people with a chronic illness unfortunately can fall into. And I encourage people to maintain hope, even if what I do can't help them. But because Chinese medicine has been around so long, and because it understands that, especially in the world of chronic illnesses, when things take time to develop, even if there's one catalyzing event, like where somebody can have lingering symptoms for a while, but that's not so severe that it affects their life, and then they get sick, say they catch a flu or catch COVID or something, and then all of a sudden, just feels like everything falls off a cliff. There are many factors contributing to what caused that to occur. And using a system that looks at lifestyle, environment, climate, diet, sleep habits, medical history, genetic family history, all of that kind of stuff helps you as a clinician put together the pieces and show, okay, what are the patterns that are affecting this patient and what is the way forward? And the better that we get at identifying all of the causes of chronic illness, the better we get at understanding what it is that people need to do to recover from it.
and so Chinese medicine, your training informs you once you've done that extensive intake, which many Western doctors don't have time to follow up on lifestyle and all those relationship issues and stuff. But
Sure.
your practice is such that you will do that intake, and then your training informs probably a different approach to helping the person get well.
My intake process differs a little bit from how a Chinese medicine doctor would work in China because I treat a very broad demographic of people. For the most part, I've been doing it for a while. I know what to expect, but there are always differences because in the United States, especially, I'm dealing with a very diverse population. People live in different climate zones. They eat different diets. They're taking different kinds of medicines, different levels of physical activity, etc. In China, in a large city, a doctor might see 200 patients in a day. And because that doctor lives in that city, knows the lifestyle of all the people who are coming to see him or her, understands, okay, they're walking 10,000 to 30,000 steps a day because public transit is real. People, is really good there, and people don't need to drive cars so much. They may not sit in offices. Vegetables are more a part of the culture, so people are eating a lot of cooked vegetables and plants. They don't really need to dive into diet, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
They understand more of the family culture, whereas in the United States, you might have a very large extended family that supports you. You might also be living completely alone and isolated.
Mhm.
And so I have to take time with my patients to understand where they're at with all of those things. So there's a trending term that's been coming up in the US for a few years called functional medicine. And Chinese medicine is really one of the original functional medicines because regardless of the diagnosis that somebody has in terms of the name, the Western medical name of their disease, what we find that actually helps the best is to address basic bodily functions. And when we can get those functions into a healthy place, and I'm talking about things like sleep, bowel movement, menstruation, if you have a uterus and it's the time of your life that you should be menstruating, all of the different functions, pain recovery, the things like that. When people are able to sleep well, digest well, have a healthy endocrine system, have healthy social support, find joy in activities of daily living, we find that regardless of the diagnosis that they have, their quality of life improves dramatically.
Mhm.
Very often to the point that diagnosis that they received prior to coming in no longer would really apply. And that could apply to fibromyalgia, to chronic fatigue syndrome, to type 2 diabetes, to IBS, to any of these kind of large syndrome diagnoses, especially the ones that are diagnoses of exclusion where somebody has a bunch of symptoms, a constellation of symptoms that leads to that syndrome diagnosis, but their physician never understands, doesn't really know what's causing it.
I think that's really common.
Very
Especially
common.
autoimmune diseases. And
Yeah,
again, doctors, they don't have the time, depending on the practice that they're in, unless it's their own practice. They get their 7 minutes or whatever,
yeah,
and they are specialists, right? I
yes.
mean, our GP is not that, so they refer out. They take
Uh-huh.
the initial thing, and then you end
Yep.
up with a cardiologist or a hematologist or a
Hmm.
whatever ist,
And the,
and they're not paid to consider all the range of other things going on in your life.
no, they look inside they color within their own lines. And
Hmm.
to that degree, to the degree that applies to a certain condition, that can be magical.
Yeah,
Cardiologists
absolutely. I
are
don't mean to say that
amazing.
it's,
No,
yeah,
yeah.
no, yeah.
But like a great example from my own practice is that cardiologists are so good at managing cardiological conditions. Like, how many people do we know that would die if they didn't have a pacemaker put in? And the quality of life that they get from having a pacemaker dramatically improves. That's not something we do in Chinese medicine. And if you need a pacemaker, you should get a pacemaker.
Yeah, for sure.
But especially since the pandemic, we see so many people getting diagnosed with POTS. I don't know if you're familiar with that
I don't know
condition.
what POTS are.
It's called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It's an acronym. And it's a dysautonomia. It basically means that your heart rhythm is inappropriate based on your posture.
That's what I
So,
was thinking. Is it from people leaning over their desks? Postural?
can be,
Yeah.
can be. The classic thing is people stand up and their blood pressure drops, and then
Mm,
when they lie down, their heart rate increases a lot, and they'll
mm,
get tachycardia, racing heart rate. But it's not a it's a cardiological symptom, but it's not a cardiological problem.
mm.
So it's an autonomic nervous system problem, not a cardiovascular problem. So people will go see their primary will refer them to the cardiologist who will run a bunch of tests and say your heart rate is not appropriate. They'll do it's called a tilt table test for POTS. They'll get diagnosed with POTS, but then they'll be prescribed medications called beta blockers, which
Mm.
are, anybody who is in their 80s and has tachycardia and high blood pressure, like that's a really great medication for them to be on. But this is being done for people who are 20, 40 years old who have very healthy hearts, but they're being given this medication that is, it controls the symptom, but it doesn't actually address the cause of the problem
Mm.
because it's not a cardiological problem.
Right.
Yeah, it's a nervous system issue.
So interesting. Let's talk about the autonomic nervous system a little bit. Just
Okay.
refresh people's minds. That's the automatic one, right? It makes sure that our heart beats and we breathe in that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Peristalsis in the intestines. So the worm-like movement of intestinal squeezing that moves things through our body, rhythms, breathing, things we don't consciously control, sweating, muscular tension to a degree, especially smooth muscle tension, and vasodilation, vasoconstriction. And this is actually something that Chinese medicine has always described very well using different terminology because the autonomic nervous system has two modes if you will, that are always competing for dominance. So you have the parasympathetic, which we would call rest and digest, and you have sympathetic, which we would often call fight or flight. If you think about these in the context of a yin yang symbol, uh, parasympathetic would be yin, it's descending. Sympathetic would be yang, it's ascending. So things are always either moving up or moving down, but they're always moving. And Chinese medicine has always described yin and yang as it's often described as like we're seeking a balance, which we are, but there needs to always be tension because if those things aren't moving, you die.
Mm,
So life is the constant transformation of yang to yin and yin to yang. That's
mhm,
the wheel turns. That's how we live. We wake as the sun rises, we go to sleep as the sun sets. Cycles in nature follow this just as they do in our body. Our bodies are part of nature. These two modes of the autonomic nervous system govern how we arrive, what kinds of activities we engage in, what we feel in our bodies when we are presented with a stressor, and what kinds of reactions our bodies have to the environment.
mm,
And when the response is appropriate, we are able to wake up in the morning, have clear minds, great energy, stay organized, accomplish tasks. That's all sympathetic dominance. It is fight or flight, but it's done in a more relaxed alpha wave brain pattern, one step at a time, not pushing too hard, too fast. An emergency happens, your house catches on fire, you can go into kind of an emergency mode. And we are resilient creatures. We can hang out there for a really long time. We are the products of evolution over millions of years of people who survived emergencies. And some of those emergencies were months long famine, war, pestilence, genocide, really nasty stuff.
mm.
We are incredibly resilient. If you think about what our ancestors have had to do for us to be here, we can face a lot of stress and continue to survive in it, but it takes its toll. There's a price to pay for prolonged stress responses. It burns out your endocrine system. It makes it so that you don't recover as well while you're sleeping because the longer you stay in a heightened stress mode, the longer it takes to get out of that when you lie down and relax and try to go to sleep at night. And some people are in fight or flight mode even when they're unconscious, which is where you get really non-restorative sleep. So the practice of cultivating more yin, the practice of learning to breathe, to relax your body, to help the parasympathetic dominant emerge and become more dominant, or parasympathetic system emerge and become more dominant, allows for sympathetic to relax. And that's where we find people are able to actually recover into more of a state of homeostasis.
Yeah, that was all really well said. And I asked about it because I feel that even people who say, I'm not a stressed out person, like I would say that about myself. My aura ring says that my daytime stress levels are pretty even, and then I'm recovering and this and that. So there's proof. But
Uh-huh.
I think we fool ourselves sometimes. And when you talk about getting depleted, when people constantly get colds or they're constantly
Yep.
not really rested, even though they've had their 7 or 8 hours,
Yep.
there's something there that needs attention, would you say?
Absolutely. Yes,
So
very
how
much
does
so.
that's not like I'm going to go to the doctor and say, oh, gosh, I'm not resting as well as I used to. And they're going to say, that's because you're old, Greg. That's because it's you're aging. But should we go to doctors like you to find out if there's a way to relieve this or to get this thing back into balance?
Yeah, it depends on the paradigm of the provider you're seeing.
Hmm.
And if a provider has, I feel like I've been personally really lucky with most of my doctors, my own doctors. Like I took my kid to see a pediatrician the other week, and he was asking about her quality of sleep and ordered some labs, and there was a lot of questioning done. And also, he was 45 minutes late for his visit with us because he's just doing that with the three people we were in the fairly early morning. And I'd hate to be his last patient of the day. You're probably
I
waiting
always
two
try to get
hours
the first appointment in the morning.
but super kind of the guy to do that. Like he's not getting paid for a lot of that time, but he's doing
Hmm.
an incredible job. Not everybody's lucky enough to have a doctor who will
Absolutely.
do
Yeah.
that. And there just isn't time for most physicians because we live in a diverse population. There just isn't enough time for most physicians to ask the questions they need in 7 minutes. I'd like to think that they know how, and I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. Most people enter the profession of medicine with the best of intentions. They want to be of service working in a corrupt system that's really toxic, that's pushing all of those providers through an 80-hour a week residency will make anybody grumpy. And then if they say we're just going to throw some psychiatric medication at you because that'll force you to slow down. Yeah, but it's not really addressing the cause of the problem or helping
Mhm.
people become healthy again.
Do you incorporate any kind of, you mentioned breathing, do you incorporate recommending breath work or meditation or anything like that?
Almost every patient
Yeah.
gets that recommendation. Yeah.
Hmm.
And there's 100,000 different ways to do that. And I try to keep it really simple for people. Chinese medicine boils everything down to what we would call excess or deficiency. Western medicine does this too, but they don't, it's not talked about so much. And deficiencies are things like an estrogen deficiency, a testosterone deficiency, a vitamin B12 deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, that kind of thing. Excesses would be things like biofilm, cholesterol, an infectious load, that kind of situation. People who are excess need to breathe out more. And so we'll give them an exercise that's focused around sighing. If they're still very vital and healthy, I'll tell them to go do cardiovascular exercise. Go for a run. Go for a freaking run. That will just help you blow off steam and then you can
Yeah, yeah.
rest. If they're in a state where they can't do that or where they'll experience severe post-exertional malaise, from like a flare of their chronic pain, a flare of their fatigue, from exerting themselves too much, we'll give them breathing exercises that are focused more on taking in more gas than they express.
Mm.
So those would be breath holding exercises or yawning exercises.
Super interesting. I remember getting the sighing exercise. I don't remember what was wrong with me, but I got Dr. Gosh, what was her name? I can see her face. Anyway, she said, I want you to sigh whenever you feel like sighing. And I thought, well, that's weird. Then I noticed that I did feel like sighing at times, and I did take
Yeah.
advantage of it. And for some reason,
Yeah.
it was restorative in some ways.
A good Chinese medicine doctor should just observe the patient's breathing
Mm.
and just it's you don't even have to ask questions. You spend 2 minutes with somebody, you can see if they or are they yawning a lot. And people who are sighing all the time, we encourage them to sigh more. That's probably there because
Yeah.
that's an autonomic thing. Like it's a breathing rhythm, it's a breathing style, and your autonomic nervous system is trying to regulate your body's functions all the time by encouraging you to breathe that way. If life is forcing you to hold your breath a lot, you will hold your breath because you feel like you're in an emergency. But then the moment that you start to relax, you'll sigh more. And so we can consciously give people sighing exercises. Okay, let's help you ease that burden of stress that way.
Now, I read on your website, which I'm going to tell people the address is Crawford, CRAWFORD hyphen wellness.com. You say that you work virtually or in
Hmm.
person.
Yeah,
Describe a virtual appointment when I think
it's
of
a
you
lot
as
like
being
this.
more of a
It's a
hands-on.
Zoom.
There you go.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah.
what's wrong with me, Doc?
Let's see your tongue. A virtual appointment looks a lot like this. I ask the questions that I need to know the answers to. I look at somebody's tongue. If we're working on something that's musculoskeletal, I might ask them to demonstrate range of motion of a joint. If they need a physical medicine, I'll refer them to someone local and then have them follow up with me after or teach them an exercise series they can do. Most of my practice is virtual at this point.
Really?
And yeah, I started doing that during the pandemic
Hmm.
because I couldn't
So
see
many
people
did,
in
yeah.
person for 6 weeks. And
Right.
yeah, found out I
Now,
really liked it.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, it's,
Do you prescribe or recommend, I should say, herbal
yeah,
formulas? Yeah.
yeah. Most of my practice is herbal medicine. I do have acupuncture patients still. I'm not actually taking new patients for acupuncture at this point, but the people who've been with me forever, I haven't kicked them out yet.
Okay, good. Everybody's getting kicked out from somewhere, so good you're keeping people.
No, I work in a very small town where I grew up. I feel very loyal to the people who that I've served for a long time,
Oh,
and yeah, have no
that's
plans to stop doing that.
that's really sweet. I want to encourage the listeners to, I'm trying to find the name of your Instagram page. Is it Crawford Wellness?
It's Crawford_wellness.
Crawford underscore. You guys, really funny, but so informative. And I find, like most people these days, that a plain old talking head video is great for 30 seconds, 45 seconds. But there was Stewie popped into one of your, from Family Guy popped into one of
Oh,
your videos, and you were doing some kind of crazy dance. But there's great information. It's just that the way you deliver it makes it easy to follow and get into. And I think
thank you.
it's an underrated way to educate even adults, especially when it comes to stuff like medicine and your health. Let's have a little fun with it.
If we look at it from an ancestral perspective, the same way that I look at medicine, most of our ancestors didn't have smartphones and social media or TV, but they did have fireside chats.
Hmm.
And people have been sitting around a fire in the evening telling stories to each other for a very long time.
Yeah.
And the more that I can make my content hit those genetic triggers, so to speak, of what helps people pay attention to something that ultimately is fairly complex. But if I can trick them into seeing the simplicities that live within that complex nature and deliver it with humor in a way that helps them relax, they get the message a lot more clearly.
Super smart. It's working. You got me to go
Thanks.
through. I went through a bunch of them and I was like, damn, I have to go interview the guy. I can't look at any more videos.
Thank you.
You're
That's
welcome.
touching to hear.
Anything you want to close with?
No, that's what I do in a nutshell. I hope this helps people. Yeah, if they want to go deeper, they can binge my content. They can check out, we have a free online support group through a platform called School,
Oh yeah.
SKL. That's called the Chorus Circle. And if people want Chinese medicine doctors to take a look at their tongue and tell them what they see and offer some, we can't give medical advice in the group, but we can, in an abstract educational sense, we can say, you could consider this or talk to your doctor about this.
Hmm.
And we have almost 2,000 people in there now helping each other out. It's really fun to see.
Can people find that through your website?
It's linked on my website. It's linked in my social media. The link in bio on social media, it's there. Or they can just go
Okay.
to school and search Chorus Circle. It'll pop right up.
Okay, great. This has been really fascinating for me as I'm a big fan of alternative medicine. Like there are so many ways to say, so many different modalities to put inside there, but Chinese medicine is certainly one of the most, I would say, revered. It's ancient. It still works. It feels somehow integrative. Well, that's not the right word. If you've never experienced Chinese medicine, for anybody who's listening, and I'm not talking about just acupuncture, but experiencing somebody looking at you as a whole person in a different way. There's something about seeing somebody who sees you and all of your energetic system of the body and the yin and the yang. It's just lovely and it's a different way. I can vouch for the fact that when I lived in San Diego, as I told Brehan earlier, my doctor was a Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine doc, and I had lots of stuff that went on. I changed environments. I went from New York City to San Diego, which is wet. New York City's dry, and I got all kinds of upper respiratory. She took care of me, fibroids, she took care of me. So anyway, I'm encouraging people who haven't yet experienced this to either check out Brehan's website. So thanks for being with us. I appreciate your time. And people, I'll be back next week with another fabulous guest.
Thank you so much, Greg.
You're welcome.